Okay. I'm going to go get my colleague.
We'll be there. We'll get there. And you don't know how many people are on the...
That's true. I don't know nothing about it online.
Is that being recorded today as well?
Yes, so
Yeah, it's not.
Oh, good, good.
Shabbat Shalom, good morning. And so we are doing things slightly differently in the sanctuary because we've been hearing comments that people watching remotely, either on Facebook or YouTube, are not hearing the microphone when I come down with the wireless. So we'll do some sound checks on that in future weeks. And for now, we will have this kind of setup. And I will come down, I'll just use this mic instead. So we turn now to page 190 in our Siddur. And for those of you who have yet to put on a talit and would like to join me, I'm on page 190. Bless Adonai, O my soul, Adonai, my God, how great you are. You are robed in glory and majesty, wrapping yourself in light as in a garment, spreading forth the heavens like a curtain. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lechita tev b'tzitzit. As we turn to page 186, 186. Modani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, shehechezarta b'nishmati b'chemna, b'chemna, rabba emunatecha, moda'ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, shehechezarta b'nishmati b'chemla, b'chemla, rabba emunatecha, rabba emunatecha. We continue on page 193, 193. May the one whose spirit is with us in every righteous deed be with all who work for the good of humanity and bear the burdens of others, and who give bread to the hungry, who clothe the naked, and take the friendless into their homes. May the work of their hands endure, and may the seed they sow bring abundant harvest. On page 194. Praise to you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who formed the human body with skill, creating the body's many pathways and openings. It is well known before your throne of glory that if one of them be wrongly opened or closed, it would be impossible to endure and stand before you. Blessed are you, Adonai, who heals all flesh, working wondrously. Baruch atah Adonai, rofei chol basar umafli la'asot. On page 196. Elohai neshama shenatata biteho rahi. Elohai neshama shenatata biteho rahi. Elohai neshama shenatata biteho Tehora, Tehorahi, Elohai neshama Shenatata bi tehorahi. Elohai neshama Shenatata bi tehorahi. On page 197, my soul came to me pure, drawn from the reservoir of the holy. All the time it remains within me, I am thankful for its thirst for compassion and justice. Let my eyes behold the beauty of all creatures. Let my hands know the privilege of righteous deeds. Baruch atah Adonai, asher bi'ado nefesh kol chai, ve'ruach kol besar ish. And as we turn to our Nisim B'chol Yom, our miracles of every day, I would ask if there's anyone who has something to share that is a daily miracle, something good that's happened in your life.
Got to share something.
Okay.
And you will know that I had some of my dearest family here last week. They all got home safely. And I have decided a number of years ago that the most beautiful things to us that happen in our lives come from our families. And it's the most precious thing we have to cling to as we get older.
I'm just going to sum that up for those who couldn't hear because you didn't have a microphone, but that you had your family visit, and the most beautiful things that happen to us in life are those things with family. Well, I will share that this past week I had an opportunity to spend some time with several of the past presidents of Addith Emanuel, Bruce being one of them, and it was just a delightful, upbeat, and exciting meeting as we'll be planning some things in the coming year in honor of our 25th anniversary coming to this building. So it's been 25 years we're in this building.
Most of them can't carry the tune.
I didn't hear you, Goldies. Most of them what?
Most of them can't carry the tune.
Most of them can't carry, okay, the tune? That's okay. They carry the spirit, and that's what's important. And I'm not one to make that judgment. And so we pray our Nisim B'chol Yom, our miracles for every day. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lasech bibina, lehavchin ben yom uvein laila. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzadegav. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten le'ya'ef koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hama'avir sheina me'einai, udnuma me'afapai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shasani b'tzelem Elohim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, sha'asani bat chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, sha'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael b'tifaram. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. At the bottom of page 204. O Adonai, our God, let the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and the mouths of your people Israel, so that we, our descendants, and the descendants of all your people Israel, may know you by studying your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, hamlamei Torah le'amo Yisrael. On page 207, we need Jewish men and women to become a Jewishly inspired and informed leadership, not only rabbinical but also lay. We need Jews more conversant with the thought and teachings of Judaism, to whom Judaism is no cold, remote theology, and Hebrew learning a matter of mystical ignorance, and to whom Jewish culture is no proxied culture. We need a reassertion of faith and a reawakening of interest in a cultural heritage that is all too rapidly being relegated to the exclusive possession of graduates of rabbinical seminaries. We desperately need such lay leaders today with vision and fortitude. As we turn now to page 215, 215. Ashrei yoshvei beitecha, od yehalelucha selah. Ashrei ha'am shekach lo, ashrei ha'am sh'Adonai Eloha. Tila l'David, aromimcha Elohai hamelech, v'avarcha shimcha le'olam va'ed. B'chol yom avarchecha, v'yalela shimcha le'olam va'ed. Gadol Adonai umhulam me'od, v'lig dulato ein cheker. Hadar kevod hodecha, v'divrei niflotecha asicha. Zecher avtucha yabiu, v'tzitkatcha yiranenu. Tov Adonai lakol, v'rachamavo kol ma'asav. Kevod malchutcha yomeru, ugvaratcha yidaberu. V'kvod hadar malchuto, malchutcha malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Somech Adonai. Einei cholei lecha yisaberu, v'ata noten lahem et ochlam b'ito. Tzadik Adonai b'chol derachav, v'chasid b'chol ma'asav. Ritzon Yireav Yahaseh, ve'ed shavatam yishma v'yoshiem. Tilat Adonai yidaber pi, v'varech kol baser shem kodsho le'olam va'ed. V'anachnu nivarech Yah, me'ata v'ad olam. Hallelujah. Page 224. We continue with Chatzi Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'yalma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uv'yomechon, Uchaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala, uvizman karib, v'imeru, amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mevarach, le'olam ulol me'almaya, yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitromam, v'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, v'yitalev, v'yitalal, Shemei Dekudesha B'richu, Leila min kol berchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiram bi'almam, bimru amen. As we're able, we rise for Baruch Hu on page 226. Ya la la la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la 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 la la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la la ya la 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 la. Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamevorach. Baruch Adonai Hamevorach, Hamevorach le'olam va'ed. Hamevorach, Hamevorach le'olam va'ed. On page 228. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer or uvorei choshech, oseh shalom uvorei et hakol, hameir la'aretz v'ladarim aleha barachamim, uvtuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reshit. Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chokhma asita, mala ha'aretz kinyanecha, titbarach Adonai Eloheinu, al shevach ma'aseh yadecha, ve'al me'orei or she'asita yifarucha sela. Or chadash al Tzion ta'ir v'nizkeh kulanu mehera le'oro, Baruch atah Adonai yotzer ha'me'orot. On page 231, once or twice in a lifetime, a man or woman may choose a radical leaving, having heard Lech Lecha, go forth. God disturbs us toward our destiny by hard events and by freedom's now urgent voice, which explode and confirm who we are. We don't like leaving, but God loves becoming. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher be'amo Yisrael be'ahava. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. May be seated. What's exciting about this prayer that we started to pray and are going to continue to pray is that it is in our Torah portion this week. But I have to say, like last week, and this happened to me yesterday, I'm feeling this wooziness right about now, this time of day. So actually, I'm going to ask Larry if you would come and lead this part of the service. Larry, if you could.
Boker Tov, everyone. And Shabbat Shalom. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. V'ahavta
את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Page 235 at the top. When justice burns within us like a flaming fire, when love evokes willing sacrifice from us, when, to the last full measure of selfless devotion, we demonstrate our belief in the ultimate triumph of truth and righteousness, then your goodness enters our lives, and we can begin to change the world. And then you live in our hearts, and we, through righteousness, behold your presence. Page 237 at the top. If people fall, can they not also rise? If they break away, can they not return? The stork in the sky knows when to migrate. The dove and the swallow know the season of return. What human instinct knows the time to turn back? What cue sparks the conscience of the soul? We pray to sense this day anew, attuned to the call of sacred living. Turn ahead now to page 240 at the top. And join me, please, in the Mi Chamocha. Mi Chamocha Ba'elim Adonai, Mi Chamocha Nedar B'Kodesh, Nora Tehilot, O Sefele, Shira Chadasha, Shibu Gelulim, Lesimchad al Sfad Hayam, Yachad Kulam, Hodu, V'yimlichu v'yamru, Adonai yimlok, Le'olam va'ed. Tzor Yisroel, Kuma b'Ezrat Yisroel, Ufedech Mecha Yehuda v'Yisrael. Go Aleinu Adonai Tzevot Shema, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai, Ka'al Yisrael. Please rise on page 242 for Tefillah and join me. Adonai Sivatai Tiftach Ufi Agi Tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may praise you or praise. Baruch Atah Adonai
Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Ha'Ra, Hagibur Ha'Nora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, V'zocher Chasdei Avavim Ahot, U'mevi Gula Livnei V'neihem, Leman Shemo B'Yava, Melech Ozer Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magen Avraham V'Ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayei HaKol Atah Rav Lo'Tshia, Morid Hatav, Mechakel Chaim B'Chesed, Mechayei HaKol B'Rachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim Rofech Olim, Umatir Asurim, Kayem Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Michamo Kabal Giverot, Amidah Melech Memit, Umechayeh, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'emanat Kol HaChayot HaKol, Baruch Atah Adonai, Mechayei HaKol. Page 248. Nekadesh et simcha ba'olam, Kishem shemakdashim oto b'shmei marom, Kakatuv al yad neviecha, V'karoz el zevi amar, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzilot, Melo Kol Haaretz, Kivodo, Adir, Adirenu, Adonai, Adonenu, Madir, Shimcha B'Kol Haaretz, Baruch Kevod Adonai, Mimkamo. Echad Eloheinu, Hu Avinu Malkeinu, Hu Moshienu v'Hu Yasmienu, Berachamav li'enei kol chai. Ani Adonai Elohechem, Yimloch Adonai li'olam, Elohai Yichtion, L'dor v'ador, Hallelujah. L'dor v'ador nagid God lecha, u'lenetzat mechatzim, k'dashaka nakish, v'shivchacha lehenu, mipenu lo yamush, li'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el ha'kadosh. Be seated, please. Page 250 at the top. Please join me. Yismechu b'malachutecha, shomrei, 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 Shabbat b'korei, oneg Shabbat. Yismechu b'malachutecha, Shomrei, 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 Shabbat b'korei, oneg Shabbat. Am Mekadashei, Mekadashei Shavi Shabbat. Chulam yitagu mituvecha Shabbat. Yismachu v'malachutecha, Shomrei, 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 Shabbat. Korei oneg Shabbat, Yismechu v'malachutecha, Shomrei, 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 Shabbat b'korei oneg Shabbat. Kulam yasviu,
V'hashvi ratzeta bo v'kedashta Shabbat. Chemdat yamim, o tekarata Shabbat. Yismachu v'malachutacha, shomrei, shomrei, shomrei Shabbat. Korei onek Shabbat. Zecher l'maseh bereshit Shabbat. Zecher l'maseh bereshit Shabbat. Yismachu v'malachutacha, shomrei, shomrei, shomrei Shabbat. Korei onek Shabbat. Page 251, toward the top. We are a people in whom the past endures, in whom the present is inconceivable without moments gone by. The Exodus lasted a moment enduring forever. What happened once upon a time happens all the time. Page 253 at the top. We offer thanks, O God, for this Shabbat, which unites us in faith and hope, for Shabbat holiness, which inspires sacred living, for Shabbat memories glowing even in darkness, for Shabbat peace, born of friendship and love. We offer thanks and blessing, O God. Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. We read together now at the middle and bottom of page 256. We acknowledge with thanks that you are Adonai, our God, and the God of our ancestors forever. You are the rock of our lives and the shield of our salvation in every generation. Let us thank you and praise you for our lives which are in your hand, for our souls which are in your care, for your miracles that we experience every day, and for your wondrous deeds and favor at every time of day, evening, morning, and noon. O good one, whose mercies never end, O compassionate one, whose kindness never fails, we forever put our hope in you. For all these things, O sovereign, let your name be forever praised and blessed. O God, our Redeemer and Helper, let all who affirm you and praise you, your name, in truth. Blessed are you, Adonai, your name is goodness, and you are worthy of thanksgiving. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha, l'cha na'eh, l'hodot. Goldie, you lead us in Shem Shalom, prayer for peace, on 258.
Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Chaim v'chesed, chaim v'chesed v'rachamim. Chaim v'chesed, chaim v'chesed v'rachamim. V'rachamim, sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Oleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Oleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Amechu. Sim shalom, sim shalom, tova uvracha.
Thank you, Goldie. We continue now with personal meditations or private prayers, and concluding with Oseh Shalom on page 260. Imru, Imru, Amen. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, Yal Kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, Yal Kol Yisrael.
We're going to do the Torah next, so stay up here. My word of the week has been savlanut. Savlanut means patience. So I appreciate the patience that I'm working on or practicing as I'm waiting to unpack all my boxes, and I appreciate your savlanut, your patience as I don't know what's going on, and this is like the third time this has happened. Just get this wooziness, but then maybe get my energy back. As we turn now to Seder Kriyat Torah for the reading of Torah on page 362. 362, and we rise. Ein kamocha Elohim Adonai, ve'ein kema'asecha, malchutecha malchut, kol olamim u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Shosha Devarim, Al Shosha Devarim, Haolam, Haolam, Omed. Ve'al Gemilut Hasadim. Do you want to read? Do you want to read this morning? Maybe seated. So I'm really excited because I always love it when this prayer comes from this prayer that we're praying in our service comes from the Torah. And so this morning we already prayed the Shema, and that's in this week's Torah portion, Va'etchanan. The Etchanan has a lot of good stuff in it, among it the Shema and V'ahavta, a second rendering of the Ten Commandments, and a lot of other good juicy stuff. And so it's so exciting when we can do this. So I said to Larry last night, you might already know the cantillation. Would you like the honor of chanting Torah this morning? And you really only have to learn one line, because normally we don't chant Shema to the cantillation melody. We have other melodies, but the V'ahavta, when we chant it in our prayer service, we are actually chanting the cantillation that is assigned to these words from Torah. So I would invite somebody who has had something good or celebratory, or just says, this is my morning for an aliyah to the Torah, to share that you would like the honor of the aliyah to the Torah. And it can't be Larry, because Larry's going to have the honor of chanting. So, Bruce, I would ask you to rise in your place. And your Hebrew name? Beryl Yisrael Ben Zalman. Ya Nala Amod, Beryl Yisrael Ben Zalman, Levarech al HaTorah. Baruch Adonai HaBarak Le'olam Va'ed. Amen.
Amen.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't give the page number. So we are Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 in any Tanakh, in any Torah, anywhere. And if you're following along in the Plout Chumash, we are on page 1366. Page 1366. I got so excited I forgot to announce the page. Go ahead.
Amen. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, v'chol levavcha, v'chol nafshecha, v'chol miyadecha. V'hayu advarim ha'eleh, asher anochi mitzavcha hayam al levavecha, v'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta b'am, v'shiftecha b'veitecha, uvlechtecha v'derech, u'shachvecha uvkumecha, u'kshartam liot ayadecha, v'hayu l'totafot eineinecha, u'ktavtam amazot beitecha, u'visharecha.
Amen. We turn our thoughts and prayers now to those who are in need of healing. And so we turn in our Siddur to page 371. Page 371. As I mentioned aloud, the names of those people in our extended Adith family who are in need of healing. I would also ask if you're watching through the blessing of technology and want to add the names of your loved ones who are in need of healing, you can do so at this time. As we think of Sarah Drasnin, Coco Aguilar, Jonathan Shapiro, Ron Fisher, Jeff Schaefer, Lulu Rivuela, Marion Gwertz, Aaron Tepper, Lily Tepper, Joan Major, Karen Bowen, Louis Alahat, Mary Parker, Barbara Cohn, Tricia Tepper, Jordan Maverick Steinberg, Carol Schaefer, Harriet Rosenberg, Hudson Hodge, Carrie Basin, Dr. Jerry Herman, Todd Pollard, Murray Kammerman, Mary Mednitsky, Jocelyn Jackson, Jen Jones, Shirley Friedlander, Michael Infanti, Gary Garnick, Sarah Oken, Ann Marsden, Jerry Dreskin, Lynn Romsberg, Rick Ulrich, Ileana Cohn, and other names that we have to share for those who are here in person.
Ari Deutsch, Robin Levy, Martin Oshler. Two votes. Two votes.
Baruch atah Adonai, Rofei HaCholim. Mishebeirach Avoteinu Mekor HaBracha Limotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishebeirach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. As we are able, we rise as we lift and dress Torah. And you'll be able to see closest to Larry, part of the second of the Ten Commandments. And right in the middle, I don't know if you'll be able to see it from where you're standing, but there's the large ayin on the word Shema at the end of Shema, and the large dalet at the end of Echad, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. So I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it'll be right there in the middle column. V'zot haTorah asher sam Moshe, v'zot haTorah, v'zot haTorah asher sam Moshe, v'zot haTorah, lifnei bnei Yisrael, v'zot haTorah, al pi Adonai. As we turn now to words of our Haftarah, our Haftarah for this Shabbat is always called Shabbat. The Sabbath this Saturday is called Shabbat Nachamu because of the name of the Torah portion, which you can find in the Plowed Chumash on page 1595, 1595. It comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 1 and following, and it is the story of Isaiah offering comfort. It's always Shabbat Nachamu because it's the Shabbat that follows the observance of Tisha B'Av, when we commemorate the destruction of the first and second temples in Jerusalem. And so now we're in a special period in the cycle of the Jewish calendar where we now have these 7 Haftarah portions that come from Isaiah that are offering us comfort. Not 7 days like we have Shiva, but 7 weeks of comfort. And all our Haftarah selections we're going to find reflects that. So I'll bring down the microphone. Who is on for Haftarah this week? Carol, do you want to? And then we'll do the blessings.
Do you want your stool down here or up here?
I'm going to go back up there. So if you'd like to follow along in the blessings, we're on page 372. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nvi'im tovim v'ratza b'divreihem hane'marim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah u'v'Moshe avdo u'v'Yisrael amo u'v'nvi'ei ha'emet v'tzedek.
Comfort my people, comfort them, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem, say to her that she has served her term, that her sin is pardoned, for she has received from the hand of the Eternal more than enough punishment for her sins. A voice calls, prepare a road for the Eternal through the wilderness, clear a highway in the desert for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, every mountain and hill made low. The uneven ground shall be made level, the rough places a plain. The Eternal's presence shall be revealed, and united all shall see it. For the Eternal One has spoken. A voice rings out, announce. Another asks, what shall I announce? All flesh is grass, and all its grace like a flower in the field. Grass withers, and flowers fade when God's breath blows on them. Yes, the people are grass. Grass withers and flowers fade, but our God's words holds good forever. Ascend a high mountain, O herald of good tidings to Zion. Raise your voice with power. O herald of good tidings to Jerusalem, speak up without fear. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Behold the eternal God coming in might, coming to rule with outstretched arms, bringing divine reward and a recompense from on high. Like a shepherd tending a flock, gathering the lambs in his arms, carrying them and gently leading the ewes. Who can measure the oceans in the palm of their hand, or gauge the skies with a span, or put the earth's dust in a bushel, or weigh the mountains in a scale, the hills on a balance? Who can assess the mind of the Eternal or act as God's advisors? Whom has God consulted? From whom has God taken instruction to learn the path of right? who has guided God in knowledge, teaching God the way of understanding. Why the nations are but a drop in the bucket, no more than dust on a scale. To God the whole islands are but fine dust. All Lebanon could not provide fuel enough, nor are all its beasts enough for burnt offerings. The nations are nothing before God, who considers them less than nothing. To whom then can you liken God? What can you imagine that compares to God? An idol? A metal worker poured it, a smith plated it with gold and forged silver links. As a gift, someone chooses mulberry, a wood that does not rot, then finds a skilled woodworker to make an idol that won't fall down. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Were you not told from the beginning? Have you not grasped how the world began? It is God enthroned beyond the horizon, to whom we all seem like grasshoppers. It is God who spreads the heavens out like a curtain and stretches them like a tent to live in, bringing princes to naught, making earth's rulers as nothing. Scarcely they are planted, hardly sown. Scarcely has their stem taken root in earth. When God blows on them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom then will you compare me? Who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes on high and see who created these stars. The one who leads out their host by number, calling them each by name, by whose great might and vast power, not one is missing.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol haolamim, tzadik bechol hadorot, ha'el haneheman haomer ve'oseh, hamdaber umkayem, shekol devarav emet v'tzedek, al haTorah v'al havodah v'al hanviim, V'al yom haShabbat hazeh, shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu, likdusha v'limnucha, lechavod ultifaret, al hakol Adonai Eloheinu, anachnu modim lach, umvarchim otach, yitbarach shimcha b'fi kol chai, tamid le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh haShabbat. And so we turn now to words of Devar Torah. I'll come down here now, and those of you who are watching remotely can give me the feedback to let us know, are you able to hear us better with the stationary mic than we were with the lavalier? Recently, I learned that Rabbi Levine and Debbie Friedman had a debate. You're all nodding because you know what the debate is, but I just learned this. But for those of you who don't know what the debate is, it was the debate of the wording in the song, Thou Shalt Love, the translation of V'ahavta, which we get from this week's portion. Now, what I learned was that Rabbi Levine switched the order of the words as Debbie Friedman had written them, which was, she wrote them according to the way they are in the Torah, and he liked to reverse it because of how the music went. And what are those words are, when thou liest down and when thou risest up. And on my first Friday Kabbalat Shabbat here, we sang that version, and I said, that's not how I remembered singing it all those years at camp, or other times that I'd been in the Reform movement. And then I finally had a conversation with Sandy, who explained to me this debate that Rabbi Levine, it's the way it goes up. So now I have to go back to the whole thing. When thou And when thou risest up, and when thou liest down. So that makes sense musically, but that's not the way it was in the text. So in the text of the Torah. So that was a bit of a debate that was between the two of them. And it just so notes that this comes from the words that Larry chanted so beautifully this morning. And just for those who would like the translation, "Hear, O Israel, the Eternal is our God, the Eternal alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Take to heart these instructions with which I charge you this day." By the way, this translation comes from Sepharia.org, which is a newer translation. "Impress them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." And it leads me to the topic of what is the position that we're supposed to be in when we recite the Shema? There's a story of a rabbi who came to a synagogue and he was leading the service, and when they got to the Shema, some people were standing, and the people who were sitting said, "Sit down, sit down." And the people who were standing said, "Stand up, stand up." And the rabbi didn't know what to do. He didn't know if he should say, "Please rise," or be seated. I think this was a conservative synagogue many years ago. And so it just happened, this new rabbi goes to the rabbi emeritus and says, what's going on? And he said, when I got here, that was the tradition. So they went to the, a few of the ritual directors that had those positions and lay leaders, and they said, the other rabbi emeritus is still around. Let's go to the senior home and ask him. And so they went to that rabbi and asked him, and the new rabbi said, "So what happened was, I was in services and people stood up for the Shema, and the people who were sitting said, 'No, sit down,' and the people who were standing said, 'No, sit up.' And one of the ritual directors says, 'Yes, when we say the Shema, we stand.' And the old rabbi emeritus said, 'No, that's not the way it was.' And so the other ritual director said, 'See, when we say the Shema, we sit.' And the rabbi emeritus, the senior said, 'No, that's not the way we do it.' And the one ritual director says, 'We sit.' 'No, we stand.' He says, 'That's the way we do it.'" Thank you for laughing. So what did they do during the Shema? They argued whether you were supposed to sit or supposed to stand. And that is a joke. As my father would say, it's a true story. This is a true story. So what are we supposed to do? So I have a couple sources. When we recite Shema, there are different kinds of choreography. One is, according to the Encyclopedia Judaica, it's customary to place your right hand over your eyes while reciting the first verse as to aid in concentration. Now, I believe from our Mishkan Tefillah in the morning, they discuss in the paragraph before the Shema how we bring together from the four corners of the earth and we take the tzitzit in our left hand. And so if it's in the left hand and we place them over the eyes, I'm like, well, is it the left hand or is it the right hand? Point being, some people close their eyes or cover their eyes to concentrate on those words. And it says for the same reason of concentration, this first verse should be recited in a loud voice. And one should not wink or gesticulate while reading the Shema, but one should recite it in fear and trembling. The Shema should be recited sufficiently loudly for it to be heard by the ear, right? Because we're saying, "Hear, O Israel." Care must be taken to enunciate the words clearly, as this applies especially to two consecutive words, the first of which ends and the second of which begins with the same letter. I'm thinking actually the last letter of that first line, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. I've heard some people recite it and give like its own syllable to that dalet, that D sound at the end. And that's written large, one of those two large letters in the Torah, because if it were a resh, for those of you who've studied Hebrew and have learned it and have said those two letters are confusing, because the dalet looks like this and the resh looks like this, and it's easy to confuse this. But the word echad means one, singular, unique. So we have one unique God, but if we were to change that word from echad to acher, it would be another. And we don't want to declare that God is just another God amongst all the other gods. We want to say God is one unique God. So that's why some people say Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. You can give that a little extra dalet. And they also say that Shema can be recited in any language, but with the same clarity of enunciation one is expected to use for the Hebrew. So those are some interesting choreography and details in reciting the Shema. And I would say that in many of the Reform congregations in which I've been a part, the custom has been standing during Shema. However, there have also been cases in which I've been in Reform communities where we're sitting for the Shema as well. And so why is that? And I've been to many conservative congregations in which the custom is to be seated during the Shema. And I've been to Orthodox congregations in worship, but I can't remember because I've been less so there in that community for actual worship. So this proof of both sitting and standing is embraced comes from the Mishnah, from Mishnah Brachot. And it says, the school of Shammai maintains, in the evening, everyone should lie down to recite it, right? We were talking about lie down and rise up. And in the morning, they should stand up and recite it, because it said, when you lie down and when you rise up. But the school of Hillel says, everyone should read it just in the position one happens to be, as it is said, when you walk by the way. So, if so, why does it say, and when you lie down and when you rise up? At the time when people lie down, and at the time when people get up. So if you happen to be laying down and you're about to get up, and you're like, oh, I remember the Shema, then you'll be up. But what if you remember and you're lying down? So whatever position you're in was Hillel, and Shammai was exactly, literally what it says. And that's pretty much how Hillel and Shammai, these rabbis and we would say the houses of, their descendants would teach. Shammai was much more of a strict literalist, and Hillel was more lenient and flexible in his explanation of different laws. So in our Mishkan Tefillah book, which came out in the year 2007, it's hard to believe we're almost celebrating its 15th anniversary. There's no direction. Do you remember in even the Gates of Prayer and the Old Union Prayer Book, it would say, all rise, right before Shema, and then all are seated. Or you would hear leaders of the service say, please rise, or may be seated, and give those directives. In this Mishkan Tefillah we have, as well as our High Holy Day Machzor, Mishkan HaNefesh, there are no directives. All those all rise and may be seated have been eliminated, which is good and bad, because for new rabbis, like, what directive do I give? When? And it also gives the flexibility that you don't have to rise here because it says, to stand here. Rabbi Richard Sorensen, professor of rabbinical literature and thought at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati, in an article about Mishkan Tefillah, explains some of the history. He said the Jews in Israel stood for the recitation of the Shema, and traditionally there are 3 paragraphs of the Shema, while the Jews in Babylonia remained seated. And no explanation is given for the practice in Israel, but likely the standing posture enacts the importance of the liturgical act of affirming scriptural text. And to this day, it's customary to stand at different times. For example, when we have a public reading of the Ten Commandments. So when we read the Ten Commandments from the Torah, it's customary for all present to stand, because we were standing at Sinai, or to stand when reading from the Torah the Song of the Sea that contains the Michamocha therein. Why? Because we were standing or walking through the sea. The Babylonians apparently saw themselves as continuing the Hillelite practice, and they accused the Palestinian Jews, the Israel followers, of being Shammaites. So you got that Hillel-Shammai tension continuing. Since Babylonian practice became the normative for all of the medieval rites, the traditional practice today is to remain seated while reciting Shema. And so you will see in many synagogues, why are they sitting for the Shema, especially in more traditional congregations? So what's more comfortable? What's more comfortable for you? Think about different places you've been for services, whether they've been in Reformed places here at Addith Emmanuel, or maybe other Reformed congregations that you've visited, or conservative or Orthodox, or other streams of Judaism that I haven't mentioned. Do you recall what your position was, standing or seated for the Shema, and how did that feel for you? And then more general question, do you feel differently when you are seated or standing, reciting certain prayers? So let's hear from some of us who are in the congregation. Yes, go ahead.
Well, thank God.
And also, if we can say our names first, please. Thanks.
Hal Lichtman. Thank God there's not a third choice, or else I'm sure that being Jewish, we would also go to that one. But I grew up in a conservative synagogue, and I always remember standing.
Oh.
I don't remember ever sitting down for the Shema. And the other, and it seems appropriate because you are saying it out louder than normal. It is a verse that you're talking to the world, so to speak. It just seems very appropriate. And you didn't talk about the second line.
Baruch Shem.
Pardon me?
Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'Olam, which is missing from the Torah, by the way. I can finish your statement and then I'll address that.
Because that second line, you drop your voice down very softly, and so the Shema becomes very important, but also the second line becomes very important because it becomes very softly said, more softly than normal readings. So, I mean, the whole thing becomes very special.
Thank you. So, in the Encyclopedia Judaica, it doesn't have a mention of saying that first line loudly, and there is that implication that we say, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'Olam Va'ed, except on Yom Kippur when we also recite it in a loud voice, that second line. There's an interesting midrash about why do we say that second line softly. So the verses that Larry chanted this morning, you'll notice it was Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad V'Ahavta. There was no Baruch Shem. So some people have interpreted that, well, we say the second line softly because it's not in the Torah. There's another midrash that I love. When our patriarch Jacob was on his deathbed, he gathered all his children and grandchildren around. And remember what Jacob's name was changed to? It was, right. And he was some people talk about the end of Genesis, that's Jacob's ethical will. And giving all these blessings and what he wants his children to carry on. And so they say to their father, Shema Yisrael, listen, Israel, our papa, our grandfather, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, we know that the eternal God is one. And he, in his weakness on his deathbed, says, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. He can barely, get the energy to say it. So we say the first line loudly as Jacob's children recited it with gusto and affirmation to their father. And we recite the second one softly as Jacob in his weakness was speaking back to his children that affirmation. Blessed be the glorious majesty of God forever and ever. So that's an interesting midrash. Other comments?
Yes, I had heard some stories that through the ages, like there were times when even the Shema, when the Jews were being oppressed in different lands, they were not able to say or authorized legally in that country to say it, so they sort of circumvented it and did a sneaky thing, put this other prayer in place of it at times. I don't know how accurate that would be, but that's what I had heard at times.
Interesting. Do you remember what the alternative prayer is? I'm not familiar with this.
What's that?
I am not familiar with this, but it doesn't. You're saying it doesn't surprise me. Do you know what the
second part in
they
place of not being able to say the Shema?
Okay, I'm not familiar with that, but that makes it doesn't surprise me to hear that. Other Shema reflections, either your experience or.
I'm not very good at this, but I don't know what compels me.
And your names first, I should forget.
Ivan Rudolph. And I don't get personally, this is a personal comment, you'll forgive that, but I don't get too involved with all the details of the Orthodox rabbinate and standing, sitting, intonation of voice. I wonder frequently why I am happy and proud to be Jewish. And one of the reasons is you take a religion that's been around for thousands of years and you can disagree with it. You can have two opinions. And nobody just doesn't yell, we do it this way. He's got all kinds of research. This one did it that way. Rashi said this, Shammai said this, and you're allowed to disagree from knowledge. And I think a religion that teaches that is outstanding. It's way ahead of most of the ways of thinking in this world. And that's why you get two rabbis, you get two opinions, you get four rabbis, you get four opinions, and that's Judaism.
Or more.
Everyone based on reasoning and knowledge. And that's what we have to keep studying in our lives.
Thank you.
And God forbid your lawyers.
Any other thoughts?
Yes. One of the things is you can argue about standing, sitting, but it's really the kavanah, the feeling, the connection of it that's important. What you put behind it, the concentration, the example you set for people, in a sense. Yeah, that's the key for me.
Thank you, Larry. You mentioned the word kavanah. Kavanah often is translated as intention. What's my intention if I'm standing? What's my intention if I'm sitting? And back to what you were saying, Ivan, does it matter if I'm standing or sitting? If I'm coming from a place of knowledge or a place of reasoning, and that both can exist. So in that synagogue where that true story where that rabbi came in and what they argued, both are right. You're right and you're right.
Why do we stand for tefillah?
Why do we stand for tefillah? That's a great question.
There's another word for tefillah. It has several names. One of the names we call it, especially during the weekday, is Shmona Esrei, which means 18, right? Even though there are 19 prayers, because another one got through it. There's another word we call this prayer. Does anybody know it? It's Amidah. The word omeid means stand. So we stand for the Amidah, we stand for the standing prayer. Technically, one could stand for an entire service. I think we sit down because we allow ourselves to be comfortable or, energy-wise or whatever. It's not supposed to be painful. I mean, it is a mitzvah, our prayer, but there are sometimes for me, posture is like, oh, this seems a little bit more important, or this seems a little more focused. But the tefillah is also known as the Amidah, the standing prayer. So I grew up in a Reformed congregation in which it was standing for the Shema. And if you were seated, you would stand, as opposed to the Hillel, whatever position you're in, you continue that way. So if you're seated, you stay seated. But that's not what I grew up with. And so the first time that I was seated maybe in a conservative congregation, I noticed it. I thought that was weird. It's like the Shema, how important. How could we not be standing? Because I felt that when we stand during a prayer, it was a sign of respect. And what I love about my Judaism is that I evolve. I grow and I change. And sometimes I think one way, and then I think another way, and then I might go back to the old way, or I might go in a different direction. And I have become comfortable whether I'm standing or seated. And what I try to do is, thank you, Larry, for using that word kavanah, is focus and see, am I doing well in my spiritual practice today, or in this moment, focusing on what is the meaning of Shema and my connection with that one God. So whether we stand or sit, let our words continue to give testimony like that ayin and that daled, which put it together means aid, witness, that testimony to the oneness of our God. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shabbat Shalom.
As we turn now in our Siddur to page 374, as we return the Torah to the Ark, we do stand. That is a custom. And often I've been trying to say we stand as we are able, because not everybody is able to be in a standing position. Hallelujah, Shem Adonai, Kinizda Shemo Levado, Odo Aleretz V'Shamayim, Vayarem Kerem Yamu, Tehila Lechol Hasidav, V'Bnei Yisrael, Am Kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Lekatov natati lachem, Torati al tazovru. Eitz chaim li, lemachazikim ba, v'tomchecha, merushar, terachea, tachenoam, b'chol netivoteha, shalom, hashivenu Adonai, elecha v'nashuva, kadesh, kadesh, yamim, kedem. And we remain standing for our closing section of the service On Aleinu, we turn to page 586. Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon ha'kol, la'tei gedula li'otzeh bereshit, shelo asanu ku'ayei ha'ratzot, velo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam kalkenu kahem, v'gor aleinu k'kol hamonam, v'anachnu kolim, u'mishachalim u'modim. Lifnei Melech Malchei HaMlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On page 591. V'ne'emar v'chaya Adonai, lemelech al kol ha'aretz, hayom hahu, hayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo, u'shemo, u'shemo echad. And our thoughts turn now to those who are no longer with us, and so we turn in our prayer books to pages 598 and 599 as we think of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who've died during the period of Shiva and Shloshim. We remember Shirley L. Lewis, mother of Kathy Wemmer, Harriet Ann LeWinter Rockland, sister of Myra Malamet, as well as those who died at this season in years past, whose yahrzeits we observe on the Shabbat: Shirley Bram, Zelda Freimark, Fumiko Gonzalez, Marion Goodman, Isaac Grossman, Samuel Isidore, Edith Jameson, Sophie Kaysen, Anna Kushner, Joseph Lieberman, John R. Lowenthal, Ursula Lowenthal, Leonard Moskowitz, Jacob Rotgard, Michael Schaefer, Marilyn Starbecker, Rose Zach, and others who we might mention aloud at this time. If you're here in person, you can raise your hand, and if you're watching through the blessing of technology, you can add those names in the comments. Other names to add at this time.
Anna Summers and Piper Summers.
Zichronam levracha. May their memories be for blessing as we continue now with words of Mourner's Kaddish. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabbah, ve'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayei chon v'yomei u'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mevarach le'olam omei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudasha b'riachu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechamata, ta'amiran b'yam